Yeah, indeed. See you online. Here we are online. Good afternoon to everybody for this further episode of our FSR debate. Today we're looking at the LNG market, and we look at the relationship between this market and sustainability. So the title of debate today is LNG market sustainability, how to include emission intensity information in LNG agreements. And I immediately pass the screen to my colleague, Ilaria Conti. I'm Alberto Potocnik, and we both we co-host this debate. So Ilaria, up to you to present the topic of today.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to discuss, as Alberto mentioned, a pretty interesting relationship between LNG markets and the sustainability aspect of the LNG markets. You know that at the Florence School of Regulation, we regularly focus on gas markets and particularly looking at the carbonization of the energy system. So today we are going to take this specific angle of gas markets. We're going to focus on LNG, liquefied natural gas, which, as we all know, is a global, very important dimension. The LNG market is by definition a global intercorrelated market. And LNG in Europe in recent years has gained a lot of importance, a lot of attention, and now occupies a larger share of the European energy mix. This happened as a consequence of the aggression of Russia to Ukraine and the overall outbreak of the gas crisis and the war that we are still seeing the consequences of. As a response to the sudden shortage of Russian gas pipeline, LNG has increased in recent years. So we've seen a big increase, particularly we are talking about plus 60% compared to the previous year in 2022, about 50 BCM of the total demand of European gas demand were covered thanks to the increase in LNG.
So we all have to look
in today's debate, we are going to focus in particular on the carbon intensity of LNG. So what does it mean? We are aware that with the increase of the LNG coming to Europe, we have to pay attention, probably even greater attention, to the level of carbon intensity that these LNG cargoes actually bring as well within. And we know that in Europe we have ambitious, important climate targets to meet. So we want to discuss how to address specifically the carbon intensity of LNG. We are organizing this debate with the help and the support of LNGnet, which is a EU-funded project. Now, unfortunately, it's going to conclude. It's been 3.5 years, and the Florence School of Regulation has been part of this project as being part of the consortium for implementation of LNGnet. And we have some representatives of LNGnet and some of the key experts who have been contributing to this project in these 3.5 years. So I hope you will enjoy today's debate. I'm going to introduce now the first two speakers who will give the introductory presentations. And then in the second part, I'm going to hand over the floor to Alberto, who will be moderating the panel of speakers. He will also introduce them to us. And as usual, we also want to encourage interaction and debate. So please don't hesitate to start typing your questions for our panelists already as of now. And we will try to pick them in the second part of today's debate. We have also prepared some polls, but step by step, we'll see later. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Gunnar Steck, independent consultant at Enquidity, but he is here today in his role of team leader of LNGnet, the project that I just mentioned. Thank you, Gunnar, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilaria. I'll try to share my screen in order to start my presentation. Just a moment. I need to put it to first page. Okay, can you see it?
Yes,
Yes.
it works.
Very good. Okay, hello everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Gunnar Steck. I'm, as Ilaria just said, what's called the team leader of LNGnet. And in my presentation that I was asked to give today, I will quickly explain and go through first the background of LNGnet and its specialized working group number 5. Which is about LNG trading arrangements in the context of energy transition. And then I will try to give you exactly that context of energy transition and how LNG trading arrangements, LNG supply and purchase agreements might need to adapt to that context. So let's start with an introduction of very brief introduction of the project. 3.5 years project implemented by a consortium of 3 partners, which is Secoforma, that's a Brussels-based event management company, Baringa Partners, London, and the European University Institute, Florence School of Regulation. It's been operating within the framework of the EU's long-term objective of becoming a climate neutral economy, while at the same time reckoning that natural gas and increasingly LNG will play an important role in their energy supplies over the next decades. It's been funded by the European Union, more particularly by its foreign policy instruments, which is or has been created, FPI, foreign policy instruments have been created in order to respond to, analyze and respond to external threats and challenges. And as somebody yesterday said in our meeting, you may want to decide whether energy transition and LNG is one or the other. And this project, since 2020, focused on the further evolution of global energy markets, particularly in the context of energy transition. So how can we enhance international cooperation to mitigate methane emissions along the LNG value chain was one of the points that this project touched upon. By organizing international discussions and workshops and specialized working groups on it. If you want, you can find out more by clicking on the link provided below. Now, one of the verticals of this project was to organize specialized working groups, so expert working groups that dealt in depth with certain topics. Our last expert working group, number 5, where we just concluded its second meeting, a workshop here in Brussels, was established to understand how energy transition requirements impact the contractual framework in LNG trading. So the purpose was to establish an understanding of how an evolving LNG market and the demands of energy transitions may impact contracts signed in LNG trading. Focus questions were, what's the relationship between private energy supply and purchase contracts and sustainable energy transition in terms of carbon content of cargoes? What are the policies that regulate international trade in products with higher greenhouse gas emissions? And which commercial models support the development of a carbon value chain within an LNG business? In all our specialized working groups, we started with a framing or framework study. We then had expert meetings to discuss and produce a final report. And the framing study or framework study that we provided for specialized working group 5 had the objective to identify current trading practices around the carbon value chain in LNG trading, outline examples of regulation in major import markets and upstream markets, and identify relevant clauses in currently used LNG SPAs that would need to be adapted to appropriately be able to reflect the risks of energy transition. Now, getting to those current trading practices, end users that are exposed to decarbonization policies and driven by decarbonization policies, and also by their stakeholder perceptions, have become increasingly interesting in the emission intensity of LNG cargoes. The carbon footprint of an individual cargo, or each individual cargo, varies significantly depending on for instance, the CO2 content of the reservoir gas, levels of methane leakages from production, how liquefaction and regasification are powered, and not least on the length of distance between the production facility and the destination. Many of these factors are region-specific, including that last factor. But location aside, upstream gas production accounts for the majority of producers' non-downstream emissions, so emissions that do not stem from the combustion of the gas or the use of the gas, then followed by liquefaction, shipping, and regasification. If you put numbers on it, and I know those numbers can vary from publication to publication, but very roughly, upstream gas production, processing, and transportation covers or is responsible for roughly 50% of those greenhouse gas emissions in the LNG value chain, so non-downstream value chain. Then a third of those emissions are covered by the liquefaction process, another 16% by shipping, and a relatively minor number of 1% by regas activities. All these together, however, compared to the downstream emissions, so the emissions that come from the combustion of the gas or the use of the gas in the downstream market, is roughly 1/4 to 3/4, so 25% only. And in the table provided below, you can put emissions in kilogram of CO2 equivalents to each of these activities. So decarbonizing LNG cargoes enhances the environmental competitiveness of the LNG market. Decarbonizing each step in that value chain enhances that competitiveness and allows producers, for instance, to sell a differentiated and premium product. That's an upside for producers. And that premium product is attractive to buyers looking for an LNG cargo with environmental added value, or for buyers who need to meet import restrictions due to regulations and regulatory requirements in their domestic market. Going to the next slide, the other trading practice that's currently used, currently employed, is carbon neutral LNG. So carbon neutral LNG demand has emerged as an answer to addressing the emission footprint of LNG cargoes, and was mainly driven by demand from Northeast Asian buyers. I only very quickly go through until 2 years ago. That's unfortunately the newest number I have. Around 50 carbon neutral LNG cargoes have been announced publicly. It's basically so the carbon emission footprint is offset by procuring and retiring carbon credits generated through GHG abatement projects, such as afforestation projects, farm soil management projects, methane collection projects, etc. And the appetite for those cargoes has in the last years declined substantially, likely because the reluctance of buyers to pay an additional premium for LNG cargoes, which had risen to quite substantial prices. And the other reason, probably a lack of accurate definition and transparency and credible offset to be procured in the market. Aside from the emergence of those carbon neutral LNG, driven largely by net zero targets, national net zero targets, there's another regulatory landscape to be looked at, and that's basically at the heart of Specialized Working Group 5, that regulatory landscape and the industry response to it. So climate regulations continue to evolve globally, but especially in the US and the EU, there have recently been 2 regulations set in force, or at least drafted and becoming or going through the legislative process, which established varying degrees of influence on the evolution of responsibilities and liabilities of the for greenhouse gas emissions, and especially methane emissions. So methane emissions compared to greenhouse gas emissions as such focus on intentional release of methane into the atmosphere, or intentional losses of gas, of methane, in the production process, and the liquefaction process, and the transport process. And the US methane regulation, which I want to highlight here, the US methane regulation has introduced, via the US Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, a methane fee for oil and gas companies of around $900 per ton now, and rising to $1,500 per ton in 2026, when producers, transporters, asset operators release methane above a certain threshold of their percentage of their production. That requires greater methane measurement and leak prevention responsibilities on US producers, and how that leads to and it will require independent verification of those measurements. But obviously, it's too recent to see a specific effect. One number that floats around is that already now, I think 40% of all US gas production is certified in terms of its emissions, and that's a major part of the world's energy supply already. In comparison to that, the EU methane regulation, which will enter into force with the publication in the EU's official journal at the beginning of July, or it's expected for that time, seeks to establish methane performance profiles of supplier countries and producers, and seeks to establish more transparency about methane emissions in the LNG, or in the, not only LNG, in the natural gas value chain, seeks to establish a standard monitoring and reporting and verification framework in the industry, and ultimately, as a last step, seeks to establish a so-called methane intensity threshold, above which importers of natural gas into Europe will face a fine. So that means, and details need to be clarified, that means roughly that whenever you are importing gas into Europe, you will need to demonstrate credibly that that gas has a lower emission intensity threshold than the one prescribed by the regulation, or more precise, by a set of delegated delegated regulation that will be drafted by the European Commission in the coming years. So it's undefined exactly when that will come into place. Apart from that, there's the EU inclusion of maritime transport in its emission trading system. There's the European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism that does not yet include natural gas or liquefied natural gas. But if that would be the case, it would have a major impact. And obviously, there are national net zero pledges of all countries applying, or be part of the UNFCCC Paris Agreement. So all these regulations or regulatory requirements trigger a need to adapt LNG SPAs. In order for LNG to play a role in the decarbonization of the global energy system, those SPA terms and structures will need to be revised to suit the changing priorities and interests of both producers and customers, sellers and buyers. Most prominently, GHG intensity information of a cargo is required, will be required. In the EU regulation, it's not GHG intensity, it's methane intensity, but I think it's fair to expect that that will be widened, that prospect will be, or that scope will be widened to GHG intensity in general at some point of the time by different importing countries. And you need to appreciate the fact that calculation of emission intensity is a complex task, especially if the export is not the gas producer, and especially when feed gas is transported through an interconnected pipeline network, for instance, in the US. There's a risk of incorrect information, and there's a need for fair allocation of the financial consequences if that occurs, if that is realized. And information on the carbon footprint of an LNG cargo should or can be embedded within contracts using emissions accounting and reporting frameworks, which are not yet formally established. For instance, the EU methane regulation mentions OGMP 2.0 with different levels, but that's an MRV framework that is probably the most prominent or the best known framework for MRV in place yet. If you look at what's at stake, or where are the most prominent terms in SPAs where this will play a role, I've singled out 4 different sections here. One is about the calculation or accounting methodology. So sellers and buyers need to agree on that, need to agree on monitoring, reporting, and verification schemes that are serving both ends' needs, which can be problematic if in the producer country there are different requirements from those in the importing market. They need to agree on the scope and boundaries of their application, time-wise, but also in terms of which sections, which steps of the LNG value chain or natural gas value chain are covered. They need to define responsibilities for data provision. So who is actually responsible for methane or greenhouse gas emission reports from the producer, so basically from the extraction side, who is responsible for those reporting in other sections of the value chain, the transport, the liquefaction, the maritime transport. And they might need to, or will need to, establish a liability and remedy regime when the agreed terms with regards to MRV provision, or the agreed terms with regards to a maximum GHG intensity value for each cargo or for a number of cargoes is breached. So this is what Specialized Working Group 5 is and was discussing about. We are about to finalize the working group and draft a final report in the coming days, well, watch the space in order to get more information about what we find out.
Indeed.
That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunnar, also for translating this uncertainty into some very practical table and explanation, how this could be addressed and translated for sales and purchase agreements. Now we are going to have the second presentation by Adam Joliak. I see. Thank you, Adam, for coming on screen, and thanks for being with us today. Adam is a policy officer in the Department of Energy of the European Commission, Task Force 1, which is about diversification and strategy. And he's also been our main point of contact in DG Energy in the Commission for the LNGnet project. So, Adam, we look forward to listening to you. We can't really hear you.
Hello, good afternoon,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yes. Oh, very good now.
Yes. So I understand that I have 10 minutes. So thank you very much for inviting DG Energy and giving an opportunity to present from our side as well. And thank you again for Gunnar for his capable presentation and presenting in an understandable way. I try to compete with him and to do the same from the policy side. So I'm about to share my presentation. Please
yes, it
tell
works,
me
Adam.
if,
it works.
If it works. Then I'm trying to control it in a way. Does it go into details? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So basically, there are 3 segments in my presentation because I wanted to also give a bit of a background, which I imagine you are more or less familiar with. But I ought to present these aspects as well. But my main focus will be on point 3. Especially on the methane regulation. So as of 2019, Europe has set a framework for being the first climate neutral continent by 2050, and this is called the European Green Deal. And basically, as you can see, that the main aim is to keep the pace of economic prosperity, at the same time also increasingly do it in a less and less harmful way, and by 2050 reaching this for that. As you can see, the latest element in this was from the Commission side to publish the 2040 emission targets as recommendations, so it's not carved in stone, whereas the next 2030, so Fit for 55 is low, and also the 2050 targets is part of a law. So this in a nutshell, that this is also under the global commitments, notably the Paris Agreement. There was a regulatory framework and the trajectory set by previously. Then came 2 years ago the energy crisis imposed by Russia's war in Ukraine and the weaponization of especially gas supplies to Europe there. So there was a need to quickly react at national and European level, and at European level we published the Repower EU with reduce, replace, and renew, including the storage, demand reduction. And this is very important here, that basically compared to the previously established trajectories, there was a very significant demand reduction from above 400 billion cubic meters before COVID. Last year, 2023, 330 billion cubic meters were consumed in the EU. So you already see that this is a substantial reduction, and it's expected that this dynamics will continue this way. Partially, it was caused to the accelerated installation of renewable capacity and overall energy efficiency measures and demand reduction and demand destruction, to be absolutely candid there. I'm afraid that the slide is a is not the most recent, so the 24 euros per megawatt TTF price is a bit higher at the moment. But then to go closer to LNG, it meant also at the same time of demand reduction, so overall lower need for imports. It meant at the same time that from a very substantial Russian pipeline gas share, as Ilaria was mentioning in the opening, we needed to diversify away not only to the pipeline suppliers, but notably mainly to LNG sources, and to quickly Europe quickly became the biggest destination in the global LNG markets. We also had an aggregate EU mechanism to help to manage this diversification away from Russian sources as well. So, but it's not the end point. So there are different policy initiatives there in order to help these decarbonization efforts, the demand reduction, the increased renewables, the increased energy efficiency measures, also increasing focus on industrial aspects, not only the Net Zero Industry Act, but also on critical raw materials, also needed for the energy transition, state aid or strategic technologies, and also skills. So as you can see, there is a holistic approach for that. And of course, in the international context, after the success of last year's COP, this year's COP is also an important event for Europe in order to manage this at the global stage as well. So this is about the framework in which the methane regulation fits into there. The objective and scope, as you can see, is to improve measurement, reporting, and verification. So this is about transparency, to be able to see what does it mean, what is the embedded emission which comes with the supply and shipments to the EU. But as from Gunnar's presentation, we were able to understand this is also part of multilateral efforts and bilateral efforts, which will have an impact globally, of course, to various extents in the different regions and jurisdictions. But Europe as such might be a pioneer, but it's not against currents in the global ocean in that sense. So after transparency, of course, efforts on how to reduce emissions in the short term and then on the long term as well. It has a focus both domestically, so the European oil, gas, and coal sector, but also to the imports of these energy sources and carriers there. Looking at the domestic side, so measurement and reporting of emissions at source and site level, inventory of active and inactive wells, and conduct MRV efforts. And then the second box is about mitigation and monitoring of methane emissions, which has an approach related to industrial activities and how the industry works. At least that's the intent. We know it's not perfect yet, but again, to introduce this culture and these mechanisms at the company level, which will make it possible to avoid or repair the leaks and also the cause of fugitive emissions as well, in addition to flaring. An important aspect from a philosophical perspective is the mitigation plan for inactive wells. So the mitigation aspect is already present. Core sector, which I'm not going to the details, has a slightly different approach, but basically the end results should be similar. Of course, with this framework comes also the list of different actors on the compliance level. Let's start from the right side. As I said, these efforts fit into a global landscape. Hence, there is a link to the International Methane Emissions Observatory. Within the EU, the methane regulation requires the establishment of national competent authorities, which will be actually required to make sure that the regulation is implemented at the national level, and they will be the very actors to do, for example, the inspections and handle complaints as well, and also make information publicly available and easily accessible. And then the next level of actors is independent verifiers. So obviously it's not pragmatic and practical to imagine that it will be only the national competent authorities to verify, but this level of actors of independent verifiers has been introduced. So they are also an active part or an important part of the framework. So the adoption of the regulation has already happened. We are expecting publishing the regulation itself in about 3 weeks, so early July. And there will be 20 days until which it will enter into force. So basically, we can say that mid this year, as it was anticipated in this earlier slide, it will enter into force, and by end 24, it will start to introduce some requirements for importers, targeting how to provide information and also how to tackle measurement as well. In parallel, the Commission in 25, second half or late 25, will publish a methane transparency database. And in mid-26, methane intensity profiles of third countries and producers in these third countries. Later on, by 27, the actual reporting or demonstration obligations kicks in, with importers demonstrating both for oil and gas and for coal as well, the equivalent MRV measures, which have been already set for the domestic production there. And since it's a slightly moving target for the different reasons we already discussed there. So partially because of the technology, partially because of the global initiatives as well, review clause has been introduced by 28, which gives the possibility to based on this flexibility to adopt the regulatory framework in order to more efficiently achieve the policy goals. So about from 28, reporters will start to report on methane intensity. And from 2030, they will also need to demonstrate that these reported values are below the threshold set by the Commission, which is not yet not known yet at the moment. So basically, you have seen that there is a framework of different set and measures, and there is a step-by-step approach on how to achieve these measures, and it's important to underline the review clause in 28. So I'm sorry for being a bit longer than expected, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Adam. Was perfect. No worries. I take this just 1 second to say, because I've seen a question. Yes, the slides will be available. Both the slides by Gunnar and those by Adam. We will publish them on the webpage of the event as soon as possible after the end of the event. Thank you very much to our first 2 speakers. And now, as I said, the floor goes to Alberto.
Thank you, Larias, and thank you to Gunnar and Adam for the opening presentation. Now we have a panel of experts in the field, where Luis Ignacio Parada is the president of Gas LNG Europe, a part of the Gas Infrastructure Europe. We have Kim Talus. He's professor of energy law at the Law School of University of East Finland and also University of Helsinki. Andreas Guth, Policy Director, Eurogas, and Michaela Duve, Chair of the Legal Committee at Energy Traders Europe. So 4 panelists seeing the issue from different sides, different perspectives. I would invite them first to give a 5-minute statement, opening statement, then we will run the polls, and they will have further opportunities to elaborate on the results of the polls and also to cross-comment on what the other panelists have mentioned. So I would go with the order in which you appear in the program. So Luis Ignacio, the screen is yours for your 5-minute opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto. So I will start. A large part of what I was going to say has already been said, so I will save some time. And I have to say that I found it strange that I was the first one speaking in the panel, because infrastructure operators don't have nowadays really access to these contracts. You know that many TSOs are subject to unbundling, and terminals are owned by TSOs, which effectively means that we don't know much about LNG contracts nowadays, unlike in the past when everything was integrated. But this is, of course, a very serious issue that the industry is tackling seriously, and also from the point of view of the terminals, we are very interested in this, because we are working on the decarbonization of terminals themselves. The obligations we have in the regulation have been already mentioned, so I won't go through them. There are many things that have to be already clarified or determined and are not through delegated act or implementation acts. And let's say that we nevertheless are following this. We see that emissions can vary widely depending on local contexts. And when you have a look at the main sources that are arriving to the European Union, you see that in terms of LNG, there are no major concerns when compared to pipeline gas. For example, Norway has the lowest methane emissions in the world, and in the United States, most of terminals are new. The exporting terminals, let's say, there is a diverse situation. We understand that on the producing side, small independent suppliers may face major issues. And from Qatar, again, it seems to have low methane emissions. And in case of Russia, which is an increasing there are increasing flows in the form of LNG. It seems that in this part there are low methane emissions as well. So we don't know exactly. We need a lot of data, but in general terms, we are not really worried about the situation of the LNG chain. Because most of gas exported to Europe is well controlled and has low emissions. Of course, with certain countries, and I said certain small producers, there might be problems. What are we doing as terminals? Not only we are going to implement the obligations we have according to the regulation, but we are working on decarbonization in general of LNG terminals. So I wanted to mention as well that we have this GLE study whose initial conclusions were presented in the Madrid Forum. It will be published very soon, next week, and there is this GLE study talking about how to decarbonize LNG pathways. And there are, let's say, two groups of measures that we have. You can decarbonize the upstream with renewable gas derivatives and all that, or you can still import LNG and have this decarbonization in the downstream, essentially with CCUS. And in particular, in that second case, it's very relevant to have this proper methane emission mitigation, because we will be still relying on those pathways on fossil gas. But in this study, well, we went through different pathways. We identified 7 potential pathways. As I said, some dealing with decarbonization of the upstream, so bio-LNG, LOHCS, sign LNG, sign ammonia, things like that. The other pathways were essentially LNG, where we are decarbonization in the downstream, decarbonizing in the downstream with CCUS, either using directly the methane or converting it to hydrogen. So we will have a presentation next week in Brussels if you want to attend of this study, 26 June, and we might discuss later on about that. Yeah, for this introduction, I will not extend more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luis Ignacio. Very interesting, and we look forward to seeing your study. We saw a glimpse of it in Madrid. Next is Kim Talus. Kim, the screen is yours for 5 minutes. And
thank you very much. I assume you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
So
see
the question, well. Perfect. The question was how to integrate these emission intensity information requirements in LNG agreements. The first thing to note is that we have to remember that a lot of the LNG is bought under very long-term contracts. We're talking about 15 to 25 years. When you look at the methane regulation and its implementation into these agreements, there are a number of difficult issues, both in terms of new, but in particular into existing contracts. For the existing contracts, the importer have to show that they've made an effort to create a change. But this in practice requires that both the exporter and the lenders would agree to make this type of change. And that is very difficult. I'll come back to this in a second. But for new agreements, it would appear to be a bit easier, but it's really not, especially in the short term, because the methane regulation imposes all kinds of MRV equivalency obligations. And that happens by 27. By 28, there are reporting obligations for methane intensities. And then later on, there is, of course, then the emission or intensity limit being imposed. But the methodology to calculate these intensities is only available in 27 at the earliest, I guess. Well, hopefully not at the earliest, but that might happen, of course, that they are a bit delayed. That creates a problem in the short term, because if you want to include these type of MRV obligations in new agreements, that are signed, long-term agreements, you have to do that without knowing the future framework. You don't know the methodology yet. You don't know the intensity limits. And a long-term contract, looking at its value and the risks involved for the parties, this could easily mean that we don't see any new contract signed before we have a Commission delegated act, at least on the methodology, so that we at least know what the parties would agree to. This is critical from the supplier perspective. So this is a clear issue in terms of implementation of these provisions into LNG agreements. That also means that the Commission should come up with a delegated act on the methodology as soon as possible, because without new long-term agreements, we won't see new investments, and we most likely will need that LNG in the decades to come. The second, maybe a bit more general issue, is that this methane regulation is probably not the example of the clearest and most logical piece of regulation. So there's a lot of gaps in the rules, and the concepts used are unclear and they haven't been really specified. So creating a predictable framework for the future requires that, well, basically the Commission takes certain decisions on what different things mean and how different things are being done. So just as an example, the MRV certification of a facility, it hasn't been really defined how it's done. But in my view, it has to be done at an annual basis and can't be revocable for that 1 year. Then can be re-certified again, of course. But without that, the system becomes very, very complicated and possibly impossible to comply with. So those are just examples of things that really need to be taken into consideration now going forward, because we now have a product and now we need to live with that product. But there's a lot of scope to improve. Maybe that's enough for me now.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. I think it's quite an intriguing prospect. From what I understand, we may have a hold of new LNG contract for some times, and I hope this time will be pretty short. Next is Andreas Booth, Policy Director at Eurogas. Andreas, now it's your turn. You have the screen for 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks a lot, Alberto, for the invitation. And well, Kim, it's hard to come after you because you really put it to the point. So I can only agree with almost everything that you have said. So try not to be all that repetitive. We in Eurogas have been following this specific topic, the methane emission regulation, quite widely from a downstream perspective, but also the question of the importer requirements. And we've been discussing that very intensively with our members over the past couple of months to really understand what it actually means and what it requires our members to do and what it requires exporters and producers to do. Because as you said, Kim, a lot of elements are not clear. So we see the requirements slightly critical, but it's not about the level of ambition. I think this legislation is really it's the right thing to do. It's going to the right direction, but it's really just the first step, and we need to urgently clarify some of those requirements. Some you've already mentioned, the fact that we're negotiating these contracts today, and we don't actually know what we need to comply with 2027, 28 going forward with regard to MRV equivalents, the methane intensity calculation methodology, the future methane intensity levels, and all of this is still going to be defined in the coming month and years, and I can really only urge policymakers to do that as fast as possible, because it really is, this uncertainty is coming at a particularly unfortunate time, of course, where Europe is increasingly looking to diversify their energy supplies. So here clarity is urgently needed. But there's also an additional element, and you haven't mentioned it, Kim, is, and that for me is really the elephant in the room, is how are we going to deal with these requirements, even if they become crystal clear with regard to gas that where we cannot identify the origin, where it is not possible to clearly identify the original producer of the gas that we import. That certainly is the case in some constituencies in the United States, where you have very complex natural gas value chains. Perhaps some of this can be overcome by the market adapting, but when it comes to gas purchased via third country virtual trading points, there's really no way today to identify the origin. And this has not at all been tackled in the regulation. And it really is a critical point because that could potentially concern quite a lot of the gas that is coming to Europe in the form of LNG. And so ultimately, looking at possible ways forward, I think one of the elements that short or long will have to be discussed is the way that we are going to deal with, in particular, this question: how are we going to certify the origin and the environmental attributes of gas that we import, and what kind of requirements such a certification system would have to comply with in order to qualify for the European Commission as in a form of a compliance market, really. So that is really a critical element going forward. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot, Alberto, and everybody.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. Well, very interesting, especially this problem with identifying the sources of gas once it's in the market. Finally, Michaela Duf, Chair of the Legal Committee of the Traders, the Energy Traders Europe. So now we see the perspective of the traders. Michaela, again, welcome and thank you for joining. And you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I can only agree what has been said by Kim and by Andreas directly prior to me. And it's difficult to find something to add. But I'd like to stress once more that the certainty aspect is something that is really critical for our members to have a chance to adopt contracts or negotiate new contracts that are compliant with European regulation. The step-by-step approach that has been mentioned earlier might be a good idea from the perspective of the regulator. However, when for the companies, the member companies that have to implement these rules and need to comply in all contracts that are concluded after the coming into force of this regulation, have to comply with this. This is a really crucial point. What we need to take into consideration, and it was said before, LNG is a global market. And if European buyers can only offer or accept contracts with very broad clauses to meet the European requirements, then the LNG vessels will just be diverted to other buyers with less strict regulations. And this can't be what we want. Our members are committed to complying and to providing a chair, doing their chair towards the Fit for 55 targets. And so what they need is really certainty, and this will then allow them to do their chair for the security of supply, and potentially also it will help to have affordable LNG in the European market.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I think what you are saying sort of raised to my mind the fact that we in Europe, if this uncertainty is not resolved soon, we might have to pay a premium for the uncertainty of gas coming our way in the contract that we are going to sign, while before these standards and procedures are defined. Thank you very much for your opening statement. Now we have the opportunity to involve the audience in our polls. So I pass back the screen to Ilaria to run the polls. Unfortunately, panelists will not be able to vote on them, but later on they will have the opportunity on comments on the results. So Ilaria.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alberto. Very interesting round of comments. We produced some polls, as I said. So we left the real technical expertise to our panelists. With our polls, we wanted to make a step back and put today's debate in context to understand particularly the importance, the relevance, because of course for all of us it's super relevant, it's super important, but we want to see also with our audience where we are with the understanding and the interest. So I would like to ask my colleague Tomiris in the background if she can put the first question up. Thank you very much, Tomiris. So I invite everybody in the audience to vote. The very first question is, how important do you believe that the issue that we are discussing today of LNG carbon intensity is for Europe, and what priority should it be given? So do you think it's very important because LNG is now a structural part of the energy mix? Not so important because anyway, gas volumes will be shrinking in the next decade. So this will be a problem phasing out with gas. Do you think it's certainly an important topic for companies in their daily tradings and commercial agreements, but less important for European citizens, or you're not really sure, you're still trying to understand the topic before taking a position? Please vote. Okay, so it seems we guessed it right in organizing today's debate. It seems that for most of you, almost 80% think that it's a very important topic because LNG is by all means more important in our mix, and also important for companies and for trading, as we realized. Thank you. Next question. So do you think that focusing on the standardization of LNG carbon intensity will lead to first option, start a virtuous circle leading to global LNG product standardization, because there will be the need to adapt from many parties. Second option, sensibilize non-European trading countries and encourage them towards greater sustainability standards as a sort of emulation. Third, it will increase instead the risk of security of supply for Europe, because having these provisions in place will lead to redirecting LNG cargoes elsewhere where this focus is not really important. Or you don't know. So let's see who sees the glass half full and who sees it half empty. Let's see. Well, as usual, I think it reflects very well the human, the society. So we see that there is a 60% almost of people who mainly see a risk in security of supply in working on carbon intensity for LNG and the provisions. And then the audience is mixed between the positive, let's say, outcomes of this exercise, which could lead to better sustainability and also to have Europe as an example, leading as an example in dealing with such issues. I think we have one more question. So to avoid the risk of generating international market segmentation, because in market segmentation here we mean the fact that by putting provisions regarding carbon intensity, we might have then eventually different markets depending on the level of carbon intensity for LNG. To avoid this risk of fragmentation, LNG carbon intensity should be managed at commercial level via bilateral contracts, easy. 2, be underpinned by international transparent standards. Or 3, the risk of fragmentation actually is really marginal, so there is no real need to address it. Or you don't know. Okay, so it seems that reliance on international transparent standards is by far the preferred option, and the others are almost very marginal responses. So very interesting results. And I would like to start to collect our panelists' comments. And maybe we go this way in reverse order. So I would like to start from Michaela.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. Yes, and I would love to start with the last point, underpinned by international standards. That's definitely something that would be very helpful for European buyers if the EU Commission could start approaching third countries so that we create an international standard, and buyers from the Union will not be left alone with this implementation. We also see that there is a risk for security of supply if the uncertainty remains for a long time and European buyers are not able to conclude new SPAs, literally because they can't. They are uncertain what will be the new requirements, or they have to take on all the risk. And the great importance, I think this is why we are all here. We all agree that this is an absolutely important and essential subject we need to take on and implement.
Great. Thank you very much, Michaela. Then Andreas, I'm moving to you for your considerations.
Well, I think the point that was raised by Gunnar at the very beginning, it gives you an indication of how important international standardization and having reliable and comparable data will be. You've seen that, the declining interest in carbon-free LNG cargoes, and the fact that there's no real trust in the market. And I think that suggests that really international standardization when it comes to GHG reporting on energy is really going to be critical, especially because you need to have international cooperation on actually that you're speaking the same language. You need to have the same methodologies for calculating methane intensity, for measuring, reporting, and verification. So all of that, I think, in an international value chain like the natural gas value chain is going to be absolutely essential. And we do see some good starting points here. Clearly, the EU is not acting alone. The US has been driving methane emission legislation for some time as well, and there are discussions between internationally, but driven by the European Commission and the US Department of Energy on creating what they call an MMRV framework, so an internationally coordinated framework for MRV. And while that is clearly targeting, it's not really targeting a compliance market, but I think one of the questions that stakeholders will ultimately have to ask themselves, including the European Commission, is to what extent they might consider using a tool like the MMRV as a potential compliance tool for the EU regulation. So these are just some considerations. And yes, obviously, tackling the issue is critical, just to answer the first question.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Kim.
Yes, thank you. I think I also addressed a couple of them at the same time. So to me, this inclusion of MRV and these type of limits that the methane regulation gives is logical in the sense that we impose similar rules to imports and production elsewhere than we do for our own internal EU production. So from that perspective, this is fine. The risk lies really both in the uncertainties that we still have in the regulation, but then more generally that the more stringent, more far-reaching requirements we have might easily then mean less LNG or LNG with a premium price coming to Europe. So that's of course a problem that I think is quite apparent. And that's why I think this sort of international framework would of course be preferable than EU acting pretty much alone at this stage, or alone at this stage, not even pretty much. So yes, that's I guess is my comment.
Thank you, Kim. Very interesting. Luis Ignacio.
Hi. Yeah. Some uncertainties have been mentioned on the things that will have to be met, and I wanted to highlight that infrastructure operators are also subject to those uncertainties because many thresholds and timelines or have not been defined. Some obligations subject to technologies that are not developed yet, and have these problems. On the LNG, yeah, I mean, we are concerned that if we are not adopting these measures at world level, let's say there is not consensus, we might have these problems to attract LNG at competitive prices and have the security of supply problems.
Thank you. So security of supply can be indeed one of the detrimental consequences of this exercise. I would like to invite also Gunnar and Adam in case they want to comment. I mean, you're not obliged, of course, but if you have anything you would like to share as a consideration after the polls. Adam?
Still in reverse order?
No, it's okay. You have you have the floor.
But
okay, thank you very much.
No, Adam, I think maybe in your intervention you could also address three issues which have come in through the questions, and they relate to, apart from, as I said, commenting on the poll, they relate to independent verifiers, whether there would be enough verifiers, the accreditation process, etc. Voluntary certification system, what the role they could play. And third, whether the requirement of the methane emission regulation would apply also to pure traders that do not operate any physical assets. Maybe these are the three questions that we have, so we may want also to touch on them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So first of all, I just wanted to underline that so already the policy proposal from the European Commission and already the preparatory works for that was based on several multilateral and bilateral initiatives. I mean, I could go in the list because I'm looking back to the documents. So starting from the International Methane Emission Observatory, the different work streams under the OGMP 2.0, the Methane Alert and Response System, the Methane Supply Index, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, the MMRV, as it was said, IEA, World Bank, OECD, Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, and so on and so on and so on. So we are actively engaging in that multilateral contact, especially bilaterally with the US, but also more and more with Japan as a major LNG destination country. So I just wanted to underline this, that we feel that we are not disconnected from the world, that there is a global momentum. Maybe Europe is the most forward in that, but obviously also regarding the implementation mechanisms, whether it's on the measurement or verification or the reporting itself, or the trading practices, we have to take into account these, and the actual implementation clauses have to be based on that. So, I mean, we understand the concerns, and it will be taken into account. I think the most important, also based on the other questions, is to understand the philosophy of this regulation and why, based on the requirements from the co-legislators. So the Commission made the policy proposal, legislative proposal, but the co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council, reverted back with more stringent requirements. So there is a dynamic in that sense as well. The end product, the methane regulation as it stands, it responds to that realities. But as I was trying to present also myself, the traditional triangle of energy policy, targeting security of supply and sustainability, affordability in the affordability as well is still there. So we will take into account these concerns. Back to Alberto's questions, usually we do not aim for the impossible in that sense. So if there are no practical possibilities in that sense, there must be a way which balances between the policy goal of having transparency and start action, and ultimately to reduce emissions, because this is the goal. And as I said, in Paris, there was a global momentum, not on this, but also including in this. So it's not in complete isolation. And also the same applies for the other parts of the question from Alberto, how to actually tackle this, who will have to report at what point. So these are the practical implementation points, which are the next steps to clarify, also in a working group set up with member states and with the industry, as it usually happens for European legislative cycle. So I hope I managed to remain diplomatic, but also to give some answers to the concerns raised.
Thank you very much. Gunnar, do you have some wisdom to share with us?
Wisdom to share. I think what's very helpful, and we've been doing this in the past 2 days in Specialized Working Group 5, is really to put yourself into the shoes of sellers and buyers who want to sign an agreement, well, now or within the next couple of months. So what do you have to take into account when signing or negotiating a contract if you want to import that contracted gas into Europe? You would have to first agree on emission intensity monitoring and reporting. So both parties would need to agree, okay, we will do this, and that's enough in order to be able to import the gas into Europe. What exactly that is, I think there's a hint in the regulation. It's hinting at, well, it's more than hinting. It's actually explicitly referring to OGMP 2.0 level 5 MRV measures. So ideally, both parties agree, yes, we can do that. But that's the first problem, right? So if there is, say there's a US exporter and US producer, and he's designing his project according to US administration rules, which deviate from OGMP 2.0 level 5, then obviously he either has to implement or has to be sure that he can comply with both, or that both are consistent with each other, and then he has to basically apply the more stringent one, the harder one. So that's problem number one. Probably you can overcome this if you are confident that you can reach OGMP 2.0 level 5, and that's something that exists already. It might not be detailed enough, and it will be developed further, but at least it exists. But the next point then is, after you clarified MRV, the next point is, okay, once you have reported, you are able to monitor and report and quantify your emissions. You need to agree on a emission intensity range or a threshold or a cap. And actually, you need to agree on what it agrees. Is it each and every cargo? Is it a number of cargoes over a certain period of time, etc.? That's not clear yet. It will become clear in the coming months with delegated acts provided by the Commission, or rather coming years. But unless this has actually happened, it's not clear. And that's, I think, what most people refer to if they say, look, if there's so much unclarity, we cannot sign. So reducing that in clarity, I think that's been mentioned today quite some time. That's the most prominent thing, or the most paramount thing for the Commission to do, I think. And maybe in responding to the what Julien Mintz and Carlos Arroyo in their questions asked on the screen. I think the role of verification schemes, that's not to be underestimated. So today, yes, there's MRV or there's OJMP 2.0 level 5, but there needs to be somebody that that implements or that actually verifies that you are following those rules. And at least I'm not aware, or I'm not sure who that is. And I think the regulation is foreseeing that those verifiers are accredited by member states. There's another insecurity. So if member state A accredits verifier A, can that verifier also verify reports for imports into member state B or C or D? So this is something that needs clarification as well. Ideally, obviously, if you are accredited verifier by member state A, then you should be able to verify emission statements for imports across the whole union. But again, it's not yet, I think, sufficiently clear. So verification will play a big role, and ideally, there would be the accreditation of verifiers from a very soon already, and then people can, sellers and buyers can communicate, can start discussing things with these people, because it will take time until there is a standard in MRV established, in MRV reporting, and that is probably only will become clearer as a part of that discussion process. It will take another, I don't know, it will take years until this probably this standard is sufficiently robust in order for people to rely on it in 20-year contracts of multi-billion euros. That's my take.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gunnar, also for completing the responses to our questions in the chat box. I'm checking if anybody else has any final remark, something which hasn't been underlined enough, or comment. Otherwise, I think we can go to conclusions. Alberto, would you like to start?
Well, I can start. It was very interesting. It's to me is a fairly new topic, but I think it's a bit new for everyone, especially the intricacies of it. I think it's we've seen how the many dimensions of going into something which actually until a few years, not that many years ago, was totally an uncharted water. So this is we are trying to do fast and well. And clearly there are issues that needs to be reckoned with, and details that needs to be sort of defined. But I think it's it's a meritorious effort. Actually, methane is one of the most impactful greenhouse gases. So reducing it fast is a double prize in terms of decarbonization. So I think this is noted, and I would like, to thank all. I mean, for me, it was really insightful. I leave Ilaria to close. On my side, I would like to say that, well, thank all those who attended, all those who contributed. This will be the last debate for this academic year that Ilaria and I organized. So also want to wish all of you a good summer, and thank Tomiris behind the scene, without whom nothing could happen. So Ilaria, the last word is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. No, I think I fully agree with you. And also we had a sort of pre-discussion, and we both agreed that this would be an intriguing topic. And I think this debate did confirm it. So I would like to thank, first of all the speakers today for making this even more intriguing. And I feel that this is typically one of the topics that in FSR, where in FSR we want to be early movers or prime movers, right? So we literally open the box today for discussion, and we hope that we will continue working with you and dealing into the issue even further. I feel that even though we have already a regulation, a methane emissions regulation in place, almost, it's a matter of days. And I feel that we have literally just started scratching the surface. And today we only discussed actually about methane, but there are other greenhouse gases emissions that at some point will need to be addressed too. And they also come with LNG. So fascinating topic. Looking forward to working more on this. Good luck to LNGnet for the conclusion and also for the drafting on the final report on this topic specifically. Thank you so much. And yes, have a very happy summer, all of you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.